Hello and welcome to our demonstration of Lastpass MFA. Before we really get started on today's content, just want to overview what we'll be discussing. So with Lastpass MFA, we'll at first talk about the product in general. We'll then dive into the admin's journey, setting up the account from day one, up into the moment whenever end users are starting to be onboarded and walking through their experience. We'll then set you off with some resources. So Lastpass MFA is an adaptive authentication solution that leverages biometric and contextual factors to go beyond standard 2FA to ensure only the right users are accessing the right data at the right time. Examples of biometrics include a fingerprint swipe, facial recognition, or even your voice as a mechanism to log in. Contextual factors are based on the circumstances of your login, such as geolocation, time, or IP address. Two-factor authentication, or 2FA, is one authentication layer added on top of a traditional password, which does increase the security of the login. However, those factors offer the same experience for every user, both your employees and potential cyber criminals. A one-size-fits-all authentication approach doesn't work when users have different levels of access, devices, and attributes. How is the IT team supposed to keep this all running? Cue contextual factors. When logging in on the request screen, we show factors such as time, IP, request email, and location. These are all factors we can show risk level. As we learn about the user and the risk levels can change. For example, if I go to Germany for work and I log in for the first time, or I'm attempting to, I send a request, and Lastpass MFA may flag this as suspicious. However, as I keep sending requests from Germany, the app will learn that this is a normal action and will no longer flag that activity as suspicious. That's the value of Lastpass MFA, adapting with your users. Risky transactions will have additional friction, whereas employees need seamless access to their work. It's increased security without the increased complexity. So let's introduce the Admin Dashboard. What you see here is the Lastpass MFA admin portal, where you can manage users and assign policies to optimize end user efficiency and overall security with MFA. At any time, we highly recommend you click on this graduation cap icon on the top right to take a tour of your dashboard. You'll see tasks that you've completed already checked off for you. So breezing through the MFA dashboard, let's highlight the real meat and potatoes. On the left-hand side navigation panel, we're presented with sections to interact with users, applications to configure, policies to adjust, directories that we can integrate with, and reports, auditing for review, and advanced options for billing and key storage. So let's really lay the foundation by configuring some policies. I'm going to click on policies, and the first one I'm going to talk about is geofencing. So policies, we highly recommend configuring them from the very beginning. All necessary policies, web applications, and configurations should be configured before our end users are brought on, and this will increase your adoption rates and security, thus giving you a solid return of your investment. So for example, when going to geofencing, let's create a new geofencing range. As I click the green zone, let's configure this. I will give it, for example, a location, and this one is based off of a certain geographic fence. I'm located here in San Francisco, so I'm going to be opening my exact location by typing that in, and I can adjust the radius as needed to show where accessible login ranges are. Additionally and optionally, I can add a tag name, and I can click Save in order to save this green zone for the future. You'll see that I get a notification to configure this green zone with a policy. We'll talk about that in a second. In addition to the green zone, the red zone or the red area does act the same way, just oppositely. By setting up a red zone, you'll prohibit users from logging from a certain area. So alternatively to geofencing, you can whitelist or blacklist IP addresses or ranges. To whitelist an IP, click on the IP in the left navigation panel as I've done, and go to IP. Click on Create Whitelisted IP Range. Here you can manually type in the IP address and submask, or you can just click on this current copy clipboard, and you can paste it in there as well. Whenever you're done, click on Add. We'll want to configure certain policies because we've already configured this IP range in the past. It's telling us now that we should probably go over to the Access page. So given that we'd already talked about geofencing and IP address restrictions and permissions, let's integrate this within a single policy of access. So incorporating these demonstrates the complexity of policies for accounts. These access policies allow admins to restrict access based off location and functionality. So let's start by clicking on a new policy. You can define the red and green area, as we have just shown, based off of geofencing and IP addresses. So we can go here and name this one, for example, San Francisco or even California logins. So this one will include all the ranges that I had set and are approved based off of geofence or IP. We can talk about how granular we get because this could be a general access policy where users can log in from these certain ranges. But we can even get more granular by specifying whether these geofences and IP address policies apply to specific apps. So they can access most, if not all, from a certain range, but Dropbox, for example, as a web application, they can only access from a specific IP range. Some real value in here. So as you can see, there are a variety of options that admins can implement to have some flexibility and control in terms of user authentication. So in this instance, let's say the admin configures a new policy for Dropbox, as I have mentioned. I'm going to be selecting whatever locations I already have configured for geofence and IP just to make sure I'm good to go. But let's say that I want to set a time frame as well. So that way users are only accessing these systems based off of normal working hours. So admins can assign this policy to an end user, but let's configure the time first. So I'm going to click on the policy range while I'm here, and I'm going to adjust it to perhaps normal business hours. So I'm going to do maybe 8 a.m. to about 6 p.m. My time zone is I'm on the West Coast or Pacific time. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to save. You'll see the next screen I'm automatically presented with. I'll be able to select what users I want this policy to apply to. And also, if I've configured groups, I can set this to those specific groups, or in this case, all users. In this case, I'm just going to submit it or apply it to 2 different end users. Click on Save, and these users will now be affected by that policy. So as you can see here, we're going to explore what these end users experience in terms of their login. So we're going to actually skip over these policies and jump into the more application side of logging in with SSO. So here I am on a web application I've previously configured with Dropbox. This is a normal sign-in page, and end users won't have to break their normal workflow. As you can see, Lastpass has detected that this is a single sign-on assigned user, and all we need to do is click on Continue, and we'll be logged in to this Dropbox instance. No password supplied, a single sign-on has been created. As you can see, this was a pretty seamless workflow. But let's also see whenever we remove a user, you'll find out that you are not going to be able to log in through this method because the web app has no longer been assigned. So you want to test this out on yourself before you push it out to all other end users. And that'll ensure that you're able to verify that everything is configured properly before pushing it out to the greater organization. So with geofencing and IP restrictions, those aren't the only policies we can manage. In addition to these contextual and biometric, we've also leveraged hidden factors such as signed challenge public key for infrastructure, location, and time-based one-time passwords, as well as hardware signatures. We're diving into the authentication page, and here we can see all the different multi-factor authentication methods that we can allow or disallow based off of mobile device. You can go in here, you can configure which ones are approved or not. Just know that they appear here as an additional policy. Hopping over to recovery, you want to take things one step farther. You can also define how users recover their account using the recovery policies and approved authentication methods that we had defined. So admins can add a breadth of different web applications. We have 1,200 web apps, and in addition to VPN, legacy apps, email solutions, and existing SSO providers, these web applications are crucial to creating an SSO environment and prohibiting passwords from being utilized in these instances, giving seamless access. So in this demo, we're going to configure a web application. To configure this new application, simply click on this Applications and Web Apps, and then click on Add Application. admins can follow our detailed step-by-step guides to configure each one. So we open up these accordion menu items, and in our knowledge base, we have instructions to configure each of these apps. In this case, if I want to configure an app called AHA, I can select that from my catalog, and navigating to the AHA page, I can figure out what instructions and what information they need. So I can copy these to my clipboard, download a certificate, paste it over there, and then something else important that I'll need from that service provider is their ACS. I'll type that in. Maybe it's test.com, for example. I click Save and Assign, and given that everything will be successfully configured, I'll be able to assign this to some users. Here I can select to what users I want this to apply to, click on Save, and I'll know that that web application has now been assigned to them. So this interface is pretty straightforward and simple, we believe. And again, we have some instructions on guiding through integrating these web apps. A real value of Lastpass MFA is the best practice to tie an authentication factor on top of each of your web apps. So for example, I can go to my Dropbox created web app, click on that settings, and under the fourth accordion, ensure that I have the Step Up Authentication checkbox selected. This will ensure that all users who are assigned to this web app need to utilize at least one of their authentication measures that they had configured using their mobile app whenever they log into Dropbox, again creating that extra layer of security. To talk a little bit about how we can save more time, we want to make sure again that we configure all these web apps and policies before we start onboarding users. So let's dive into a little bit more about adding users and the simplicity of that. So within the Directories tab, users can be added and updated. We are able to integrate successfully with an AD connector, Azure AD, Okta, or OneLogin. So up until now, we've really walked through the admin experience. But what do end users see as they log in to these different web applications? So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that.
Upon invitation, employees will receive a welcome email prompting them to download the Lastpass Mfa Mobile App. This app is the only software users will need. As a first step, we recommend the end user creates their account on the mobile device. The rest of the steps are as follows. Download and install the Lastpass Mfa app from the App Store. Then, open the email and proceed to Start Registration. After being redirected to the QR code, use the app to scan it. Once the phone is paired, continue to the activation and activate the Lastpass Mfa app by allowing location, service, notification, and Bluetooth. You'll be redirected back to the Lastpass Mfa app, set up your biometrics as instructed, and as a general best practice, and in order to set up face and voice recognition, please allow Lastpass Mfa to access your phone's camera and mic. Keep in mind that you need to set up at least 2 authentication methods to be able to proceed with registration. Now let's start with Touch or Face ID. So please note the process is different for iOS and Android users, and our knowledge base will guide you through the simple separate steps. Proceed with the steps given to set up for fingerprint or Face ID. And once you're finished, go ahead and test it. Secondly, set up your face authentication next. Find a well-lit place and avoid dark places. Direct sunlight or strong backlighting. Click on Start Face Setup to get started. Face the camera and follow the instructions. Move your head right and left, nod your head, and next, you'll proceed. Finally, show us that beautiful smile when instructed. Once you're done, face the camera and test the face authentication. Bingo. Optionally, you can set up voice authentication. For this to work, you'll need to find a relatively quiet place. Click on Start Recording to set up voice biometrics. Choose a passphrase and repeat it 3 times. Once done, test the voice authentication by repeating your passphrase. And finally, setting up pattern authentication. Choose a pattern by swiping your finger between at least 4 dots. You will need to enter this pattern 3 times. So make sure you test the pattern for authentication before moving forward. After you've chosen 2 out of these multiple methods, whichever your administrator permits you to use via an authentication policy, the end user registration is complete. The next step is for you to navigate to Dropbox and attempt to log in. Enter your Dropbox email into the email address field. you'll be redirected to our next page where you'll receive a notification on your mobile device. Check your phone and click on the notification. Note, if the notification does not appear, simply open the Lastpass Mfa app and click on Refresh. The app will show you the authentication requested information, including the date, time, login page, your computer, browser, and username. So carefully review that information presented and then press the Accept button. So following this, the app will ask you to enter your biometrics. Follow one of the authentication options and you'll be successfully logged in.
Here are some examples of what users will see when their login is approved versus denied. When approving the login from the Lastpass Mfa app, it will display the status circle in blue. This represents that the login was successfully authenticated. At any time, you can reject the login, and in doing so, it will display a status circle as red, representing as the request was denied. It can also show red for any suspicious activities, unfamiliar location, logging in with a new device, or no response. If you see the status circle as yellow, this means the authentication has failed due to a product error with the login. So, as we're talking about the end users, we want to talk about this experience comprehensively in terms of your success with the product. So in order to check with your success, you'll need to be auditing or checking with reports. So as we talk about that, what is your stance on reporting? With Lastpass Mfa, we have advanced reporting that includes audits for user activity, user status, and let's dive into that. If I click on reports, let's just get into the admin side, where we can see what admins have been doing throughout their time. So we can see the time, the admin name, and a description of what they have done. We can zoom in on the user, see when they logged in. We can see if status had failed, see how they authenticated in using an MFA. We also can see what applications have been used. At any time talking about these reports and auditing, you can export these and download them directly to your desktop. These last two, notifications and SAML, I won't dive too much into because for best practices, we find that admin, user, and app comprehensively cover a majority of different audits that you may need to carry out. So now let's tie everything together with what we've learned and get some best practices for deploying Lastpass Mfa. So it's dangerous to go alone. Take these suggestions and takeaways with you. First recommendation is invite a second administrator to ensure someone else has access to the Lastpass Mfa admin console. If you go on vacation or you're out of the office, they'll be there. Remember, you can always adjust policies and enforce stricter ones down the road. In the initial rollout, try to focus on finding a happy medium between security and usability for the best adoption of your end users. You also stick to security too. Next, always have a pilot group with reps from different departments moving forward to ensure the settings you've chosen fit with your organization. Following that, test your preferred user management method as soon as possible, that directory integration that I had talked about. And lastly, communicate early and often with users, and don't forget about them after you've invited them. Make sure they're ready and on the lookout for that Lastpass Mfa welcome email, and that they have training options available to them. You may want to consider posting a few key trainings or resources, getting started materials in your intranet. And to wrap up, we do want to remind you that as a Lastpass Mfa administrator, you have access to our customer care and technical support teams. You can call in for support during the work week or visit our support site and community site online for self-service resources, or submit an inquiry online. I want to thank you all for watching today's demo, and we're really looking forward to strengthening your user authentication with you through Lastpass Mfa.